This is a summary of Chapter 6, Applying the Modality Principle, by Kristen Costello, Maria Greenwood, Kathleen Johnson, and Adil Kumar. When presenting a multimedia presentation, does it matter whether the words in the presentation are presented as a verbal description or on-screen text? The modality principle would say yes. It states that words should be put in spoken form rather than printed form. This is especially necessary when the graphic is complex, the words are familiar, or the lesson is fast-paced. The modality principle applies in situations in which you present graphics and their verbal commentary at the same time. With the modality principle comes limitations. The principle suggests using spoken words rather than printed words to help explain graphics. It's suggested that this will help reduce the demands of visual processing. However, sometimes written words are necessary. Written words may be needed, such as when a new word is being introduced, a math formula is given, or directions are needed for a practice exercise. Some other limitations to the modality principle are that creating sound may involve technical demands that the learning environment cannot meet. The sound creates too much noise within the learning environment, and that it can make it more difficult to update as the information needs changes. In short, you need to be careful with choosing when to use sound versus using words. Thinking through these limitations may help with those decisions. The modality principle is supported by a cognitive theory of multimedia learning. It assumes that learning is not only dependent on the information that is presented, but also the cognitive processes used by the learner to learn the material. This means that we not only have to think about the information we are trying to deliver, but how we are delivering it, so that the learner can process as much information as possible without experiencing an overload. Luckily, we can use cognitive theory to fix this overload. Since learners use different channels to process visual and auditory information, if the on-screen text is removed and delivered verbally, then it is processed through the auditory channel. This frees up the visual channel to focus solely on the graphics. Neither channel experiences an overload and the learner can process all the information. Various studies have been conducted on the modality principle, and the majority of their findings support that graphics with narration can be more impactful than graphics with written text. In one study conducted by Moreno and Mayer 1999, students were shown an animation depicting the steps of lightning formation. The first group had verbal narration to coincide with each step in the animation. The second group did not have verbal narration and instead had on-screen text. The narrated text and on-screen text for each group was identical. Both groups were later asked to apply their knowledge of lightning formation to problem-solving test questions. The study found that students in the first group with the narrated text were able to produce more than twice as many solutions as the second group with the on-screen text. These results are referred to the modality effect. Additional eye tracking studies found that students who had narration with the animated steps of lightning formation were able to spend more time looking at the graphics. Students who had on-screen text with the animations subsequently spent less time looking at the animation. This is consistent with cognitive theory since the visual channel of the on-screen text group was being divided between processing the narration and reading the text. Here is an example where the modality principle is followed. It is an e-learning video for how to use Google Voice. I will play a few seconds of it. This is an example of the modality principle guidelines since it uses very few words and describes the value of Google Voice using narration. The justification of the modality principle is that when learners are presented with words to read and words that are heard, they are overloading their visual channel with both text and pictures rather than focusing on their visual and auditory channels. Here is an example of when the modality principle is violated. It is an example of an animation called How Are Tornadoes Formed? Pictured is a single frame from the animation. Rather than narrating each step and letting the learner focus on the graphics, the animation has on-screen text to accompany the animation. This creates an overload in the visual channel, since the learner cannot completely focus on the animation, since they must also read the text. Now that you have reached the end of our presentation, we leave you with a few questions to think about. Question number 1. Despite the modality principle, when might written text be more beneficial to the learner? Question number 2. What are some of the challenges that you may encounter while trying to apply the modality principle in your classroom? Question number 3. Does the importance of the modality principle always stay the same or does it fluctuate?